Coming up next on the Great America Show, the president of one of the country's preeminent government watchdog groups, Judicial Watch. Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch have sued to gain access to all of the CIA communications between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA, specifically targeting President Donald Trump. And we all know that President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan caused untold loss of life and global embarrassment for the president and the White House. But we also know that Biden's decision to leave billions of dollars of weapons, vehicles, and aircraft in Afghanistan has not been tallied. All of those pieces of equipment and weapons are in the hands now of the Taliban, of course. So why and just how much equipment did the U.S. military leave in Afghanistan? We still don't know, and the White House and Pentagon are covering up the total loss and waste. Judicial Watch is suing the State Department for their records about Afghanistan payments and the subsequent cover-up. Here now, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Tom, great to have you with us. You're suing for that information so that we actually have an understanding of the payments, the purpose, and the total loss to the United States. Where do we stand?
Well, they're in cover-up mode. I mean, we exposed, actually, they gave us the documents. And, you know, when someone gives you documents like the ones we obtained, it usually means because they're angry. And in this case, it was the Special Inspector General for, I think it was Afghan Reconstruction, who gave us documents about a month or so ago that showed that he objected to Biden's State Department demands that they take down reports related to the issues we're talking about. Just how much did we spend? What equipment was there? What sort of money were we spending? The sorts of reports that would allow us to understand just how devastating the surrender to the Taliban Biden's decisions were. And on top of that, in those documents, it shows that they removed over 400 reports about our spending and activities in Afghanistan as a result of Biden administration's efforts. So you had this massive censorship of the catalog of monies spent and wasted in Afghanistan by the Biden administration. And on top of that, we want to know what sort of money they were given to the Taliban after the surrender. What was going on? So we have two separate lawsuits against the State Department. So we already know there's a cover-up, because the censorship's been unprecedented. And now there's a cover-up of the cover-up. And, Congress is completely AWOL on this. The media doesn't believe that anything that happens yesterday is news, especially since they've got this kind of radical extremist left-wing agenda. And
oh boy, do they.
The organized left are enemies of history and memory, because, that means there's accountability for what they did in the past, and they don't want that. So this is what we're able to do, and it's essential that we're able to do, which is to go to court and get the accountability the American people desire for that deadly surrender. I mean, heck, there are still Americans stuck there.
And no one is even reporting on it. No one is talking about it, at least of all, of course, President Biden and his staff at the White House. I don't know, compare, if you will, the lack of transparency to the last two or three administrations. This seems to me to be the worst. And I thought the Obama administration was pretty bad, but this is awful.
Well, in some ways, the Trump administration wasn't good at all at the agency level. I mean, you and I have discussed many times about their failures to disclose information. And I mean, heck, you had the Trump administration's appointees fighting with Republicans in Congress about information on Obama corruption. They were hiding that.
Exactly.
Personally, though, and this is something the media will never admit, President Trump was personally the most transparent president in American history.
Right.
And that's why they hated him, because he talked about what he was thinking and what he was doing, what he was planning. And it sometimes politically didn't work out for him, but at least he was transparent.
Well, Tom,
and now with the Biden administration, you got the worst. You have a president who is addled and an administration that has zero regard for transparency on these corruption issues.
Well, as you know, I don't believe there's anyone more supportive of President Trump than me. But I still I begrudge the fact he was not transparent on two issues. One, releasing all of the UFO files. He chose not to do that. And secondly, we still don't have the paperwork and the documents and the history, the complete history of the JFK assassination. I was very hopeful that he would take care of those two historical cover-ups, but I was disappointed in the end. And I'm only half kidding here.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And my view is that if you want something done, you got to do it yourself. And if you think it's in the public interest that documents be released, we pay the president to do that and to make those decisions. And he should recognize that, and I'm sure he does generally recognize this now, you can't defer to even your own appointees on this because they're often hijacked by the mandarins in the deep state. Oh, we can't release this. It would, cause national security issues, or we have to protect our rights here. And it's all just politics. And, I hope there are lessons learned for the next term of President Trump or any other president coming in. The irony here is, Lou, it used to be liberals were in favor of transparency, and some still are. So to me, like, government transparency ought to be a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that every American should be demanding complete records for any historical event like the assassination of JFK. How in the world can you rationalize denying the American people their right to know? And it's administration after administration. And I really think that we're having a bit of a renaissance, an awakening in this country, because we know now that almost everything that President Trump said about this president as candidate was true. Yeah, he is inept. He's incompetent. His approval ratings now are at 33%, for crying out loud. Independents approve of this man by 25%. These are historic lows by any judgment, and it goes on and on. And one of the reasons that we so enthusiastically support Judicial Watch is all the work you do to extricate knowledge from the behemoth that is the federal government.
Yeah, and that's the reason I support Judicial Watch too. And I say that half jokingly, but obviously I'm the president of Judicial Watch. I love the work we do, but as a citizen, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank God for Judicial Watch.
Well,
and
absolutely,
and even better, thank God others are now stepping up.
Right,
our friends Project Veritas.
Right,
parents at the local level using FOIA to uncover what their school boards are up to in terms of CRT. It's been, I tell you, I take such solace. I was at an event at a hotel not too long ago, and just a regular employee, gave me the thumbs up, and English was not his first language, and he said, Judicial Watch, FOIA. And I'm like, my gosh, if regular folks now understand FOIA, that used to be a term of art here in Washington, D.C. I mean, we've come a long way in terms of educating the public about accountability, that the politics and public policy fights, but reminding Americans they have a right to know about what their government is up to makes it all worth it.
I absolutely. And without your energy and enthusiasm to reveal all of that information, the country would be in even, I think, even more trouble than it already is. I want to talk to you as well about the Judicial Watch suit to get the FBI records. over the Merrick Garland, the Attorney General Merrick Garland's memo targeting parents, particularly at school board meetings. Where does that stand?
Well, the FBI is in cover-up mode. I mean, I joke the resting state of the deep state is secrecy. And, to bring people up to date, it's now been confirmed that the Biden White House, the Secretary of Education, the Biden appointee, used a cutout, this National School Boards Association, to send a complaint to the Justice Department accusing Americans opposing CRT in the schools, parents exercising their God-given First Amendment rights, comparing them to domestic terrorists and trying to use the Patriot Act against them. Garland immediately issued a letter saying, statement, we're going to push this, ordered the FBI to get on board. And they began their anti-terrorist activities against Americans who had the temerity to oppose President Biden's CRT agenda at the local, state, and national level.
So let me see if I've got this right, Tom, because this sounds so familiar. Instead of the fake dossier being created by the Hillary Clinton campaign, the DNC, and Chris Steele, we have the Department of Education urging the creation of this statement about domestic terrorists from the school boards. And that becomes the basis for now a Justice Department investigation and creation of a new unit, just as that dossier became the basis for a phony special counsel investigation of the president. Am I correct in seeing the analog there between the two?
Right. And you could see how the germinated into the craziness of expanding the investigations and the targeting to millions of Americans. It's designed to intimidate people. I mean, Garland's initial memo was just a month before the Virginia elections. And,
yep,
that whole parent school board issue was a hot issue then. And, what's interesting is I learned separately, Judicial Watch learned separately, that Ray shortly thereafter was making a presentation. He and a colleague, I think his number two, went out and told some folks that Justice Department didn't consult with us beforehand. We are not interested in suppressing the First Amendment. We're only going to investigate violence. Now, taking Ray's dishonesty and disingenuousness aside, it's pretty clear he was distancing himself from Garland's operation. Yep. So that's why we're asking for the documents. We want to know what's going on. We want to know if the FBI is again being misused to target political enemies of the left Democrat establishment that's running this city.
There seems to be, we need the evidence that you can provide and create. I would love to see a congressional investigation, but that's not going to happen under the powers and control of the radical Dems. But Merrick Garland, he turns out to be quite a venal partisan, whether it is targeting parents and going along with, or if he is not indeed the author of, the Department of Education secretary urging the School Board Association to basically write the letter they did. He is absolutely a partisan who's weaponized further an already politicized Justice Department, is he not?
He sure is. And he had a reputation for being a somewhat sensible judge on the bench, but obviously he's an activist. And, as you're talking, Lou, it occurs to me, where are all those Justice Department figures resigning in protest over Garland's politicization of the Justice Department? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, definitely.
Those agencies are thoroughly corrupted. And as I've told you before, and I've often observed, the Justice Department and the FBI, they have thousands of James Comeys. Thousands of James Comeys.
That's a frightening thought. My good Lord. At least he's been quiet for a period here. That in and of itself is some relief. But the Merrick Garland, going back to the announcement that they're creating a domestic terror unit as a result of all of this PSYOPs operation that they're obviously running from the White House, but a psyops campaign against the American people. A persistent and evolving threat, as it's called by the folks after January 6th, they said, a persistent and evolving threat. What in the hell does that mean? It means nothing. How many domestic terrorists have been arrested? And what is their relationship? And what is the threat to the U.S. government? It's poppycock and it's pure nonsense. And they think they can pull this off because the left-wing national corporate-owned media is right there with them.
Well, and legally, I don't even know what domestic terrorism means. I mean, terrorism typically is individuals engaged in acts on behalf of a foreign government or entity.
Right.
And, the domestic version of that, Americans engaged in violence for political purposes, that's insurrection.
Yep.
So,
right.
Look, they're just using words or misusing terms for propaganda purposes to tarnish their political opposition and more dangerously intimidate them. And worst of all, there are people who are going to be prosecuted and investigated and harassed who are otherwise innocent Americans exercising their, as I say, God-given First Amendment rights to petition their government and speak out on policy matters.
Yeah, we don't know the involvement of the role of the FBI and its role in the January 6th demonstrations and the incitement for some 500 or 600 people to then enter the Capitol in some form of riot. Senator Marco Rubio said, it's hard to take seriously. It was an insurrection when they're being led by a man with a Viking cap and a Speedo. But it is what it is. They did commit crimes. But nearly all of the judgments that have been handed down in the federal court system so far of the, 600, 700 people, nearly all of them are misdemeanors. So they've been overcharged to begin with by these aggressive left-wing prosecutors that inhabit the swamp in Washington, D.C., and they're at their mercy. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're facing a rule of law crisis because the Justice Department has little credibility with a good portion of the population, and therefore all prosecutions should be on our suspect. Yep. And, it doesn't mean the Justice Department doesn't have the authority and the right and the duty to prosecute certain crimes, but when they politicize the process, it undermines confidence in the fair administration of justice. And we had a court recently because one of the January 6th defendants were saying, look how they're treating us versus look how they treated the Portland rioters.
Right.
And the judge says, look, you're still going to get prosecuted.
Or the Kenosha rioters or the Milwaukee. Right. I mean, the list goes on.
Right. And the judge says, well, nice try, but certainly there are significant questions about even-handed justice when one looks at the way the Portland rioters were treated versus the January 6th rioters.
Right. And by the way, in the Northwest, we just saw another habitual demonstrator who was charged with striking a federal officer who just got probation. No jail time at all, and did everything but dismiss the charges. It goes on and on. We have left-wing activists sitting as district court judges in much of this country right now. We have left-wing activists serving as district attorneys, whether it's Portland, whether it is Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia. The list goes on. They're not prosecuting, and police departments are unraveling around the country. People don't want to talk about it, but our police departments are in chaos. And this is a threat to their lives on the streets that they patrol and keep safe for all of us. It's a national crisis, and it's brought to you by the Radical Democrat Party, the left-wing crazed puppet president and we don't know who's pulling Biden's strings. But we do know one thing: he is a puppet in this farce, and it's a deadly, deadly piece of theater.
Well, and on top of that, you have Congress, the Pelosi, as I call it, the Pelosi Rump January 6th committee, trying to jail its political opposition by abusing the congressional processes to accuse people falsely of crimes, try to get them jailed. They're trying to misuse the process to ban and throw out members of Congress, trying to make sure that Trump can never run again. I mean, they talk about protecting democracy, and you've got this effort to destroy the House of Representatives by targeting members for the votes they made and telling people that they can't be members anymore because of their votes, and targeting democracy generally by suggesting anyone who protests against policies Democrats favor, specifically policies to undermine free and fair elections by eviscerating voter ID and making sure that ballot harvesting everywhere. You're terrorists. I mean, so when you talk about domestic terrorism in the Democratic head, it's the terrorists aren't those who beat up a cop in the Capitol. The terrorists are those who went to a rally and did what Americans since time immemorial have been doing, which is letting their views be known about a matter of public controversy.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And the January 6th committee, to put a point on what you're saying, Schumer, Pelosi, Biden are leading an effort to create a Marxist utopia in the United States, a Marxist, fascist, authoritarian utopia in the United States, which means they have to dismantle our electoral system, which they are trying to do. 2 bills right now. A president in Georgia goes down there to accuse everyone who disagrees with him of being racist. I mean, the man is absolutely out of control. And I don't care what his puppet masters who are pulling his strings say. This has to stop because he is dividing the country further instead of uniting it. And it gets uglier by the day. What this man in the White House, I don't care whether people want to call him demented, whether he is suffering from what unknown or unnamed cognitive disease. But the truth of the matter is he is working against the interest of the United States every day. And it's got to end.
Well, it's interesting. I often don't quote Mitch McConnell, but, he certainly had a good point when he said that Biden's unhinged speech was the best evidence one would ever need for the value of a filibuster in the Senate.
I think that is an absolutely terrific series of comments he made. It was the strongest pushback of his tenure as Speaker against a Democratic office holder. And it just happened to be the President of the United States. McConnell is having some sort of epiphany here as to who and what is happening on Capitol Hill and in the Senate. At least he's coming to terms with that. He has not yet acted, but hopefully we will see that as well. And the January 6th committee, again, Tom, just not to overly dwell on it, people should always remember that the January 6th committee will not release 14,000 videos of all that transpired on Capitol Hill. They don't want the rest of the country to know it. They don't want people to know what really happened. They also want to seal all of the records for the January 6th committee for 75 years. Can you begin to explain that one, Tom? I certainly can't.
No, and remember, the committee is a creature of Pelosi. So this is Pelosi. So there are questions about why Pelosi didn't secure the Capitol as Speaker of the House. That's not going to be under investigation. As you point out, the Pelosi House and the Congress generally refuses to release any of the 14,000 hours of videos. We sued in federal court for them. The Pelosi Congress came. Their lawyers said that not only can we not have them, they said they're not, quote, public records. And even if there were, the public interest doesn't necessitate their disclosure. So, I mean, they've got this.
We ought to report
all these privileges to protect Pelosi while trying to jail other Americans for asserting privileges in court to protect the presidency. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And we should probably be reporting that every day in some fashion. what their comments about it's not in the public interest for the public to know what their government is doing. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. It extends to the transparency around COVID, the efforts to actually shut down debate and discussion of what Mr. Science, Dr. Fauci, said was the concern, and he suggested strongly that it was the sole concern of the CDC, the NIH, and of course the good offices of Dr. Fauci. We're dealing with a set of elites in this government, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, call it what you wish. They are also very much out of control and out of touch with the American people. It is a very tough time in this country because we have to watch a government that was once ours become theirs. And by theirs, I mean the globalist elites.
Yeah, I mean, you have this. You had President Biden today or recently just implore social media companies to essentially censor Americans on the internet.
Yeah.
The veil, and to the degree, there's any veil left, it's all been lifted. It's a collusion between big government, big tech, and we're the targets.
We are the target increasingly of our own government. And by the way, your reaction and the Judicial Watch reaction to the order to special forces to commence training in North Carolina on how to overthrow, quote unquote, an illegitimate government, undefined, unspecific. And by the way, since when should we be training our troops to overthrow any illegitimate government anywhere? That isn't our job.
Yeah,
so is it directed at the United States government? And who will decide what is illegitimate?
Yeah, I saw something about anti-insurrection training.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got our military training to go to deploy force against Americans.
Yep.
So imagine if Trump had done that.
Well, imagine if the American people just sat slack-jawed and didn't say anything about this, didn't react to this. There is a time, and I believe the time is now, to tell this government, this president, and the Democratic Party that their psych ops campaigns against the American people stop now. And I mean now. The Republican Party leaders should be all over this right now and demanding hearings and ending this nonsense. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the current Republican leadership, despite glimmers sometimes of energy, are if they are if Republicans take either the House or the Senate, I don't think the current leadership is going to give us anything other than what the past Republican leadership has, which is, basically the same. And so, be prepared for disappointment and ineffectual and hapless oversight over the Leviathan government that's threatening our republic.
Well, it's I can't argue with you. I think your statement I think is proved every day by whether it's Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell or the Ronna McDaniel, the RNC, the Republican National Committee. These are not leaders who have done much for the American people or for even their own party. I have to give credit. Mitch McConnell finally stood up and took on Joe Biden over that racist speech that he delivered. I have to give Kevin McCarthy credit. He finally stood up and said what I've been trying to tell the Republican Party and the country for 20 years. The Chamber of Commerce is not working in the U.S. national interest. It's working in the interest of U.S. multinationals, and the workers and the working men and women in this country and their families be damned. Finally, Kevin McCarthy told the Chamber of Commerce and business groups to basically go to hell. We don't want your money. We won't be lobbying, putting up with your lobbying either. I was heartened by that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the corporate culture now in the United States, you can see the left clearly controls most of the publicly traded corporations in the country in terms of their involvement in uh, uh, sensitive political topics. I mean, is it any surprise that these woke corporations embrace vaccine mandates or initially embraced Black Lives Matter or attacked voter ID?
Yep.
That's a major issue, and of course, they're allied with Republican and conservative interests sometimes in government regulation and taxes. But
Not anymore.
I think there's going to be a reckoning even on that, given their
Yeah.
attacks on the American rule of law and fabric, and our Republican form of government in other areas.
I think we have sufficient evidence to say just at least this about the Republican Party. It has begun to understand why President Donald Trump turned the party toward the forgotten American, toward the working man and woman, the American family, the American small businessman and woman, and said, we're going to put America first. I think that is finally starting to be assimilated by the left, by the establishment wing of the Republican Party. We'll see if it expands from here, because this is only a beginning and an early beginning at that. Your thoughts, you mentioned your skepticism about the Republican Party. Are you confident about the integrity of the election first in 2022 before we even get to 2024?
Well, to the degree people were concerned about the wide use of mass mailings of ballots and ballot applications. I think there were 100 million of them sent out. A lot of that's going to take place again in 2022.
Oh boy.
And in my view, although there are some more security measures in place in places put in place in places like Georgia, and there are some good restrictions in Texas on that dangerous way of voting in terms of security, it's going to be a free-for-all largely. I mean, we uncovered that, for instance, the voting lists in New York City, key counties in California, Portland specifically, hadn't been cleaned, practically speaking, in 4 years.
Yeah, I recall.
I mean, they were removing 33 names total in all of those jurisdictions when tens of thousands of names should have been released. So I don't know how mailing ballots and voting lists that are dirty can reassure anyone that elections are going to be free and fair. And my view is we should be making sure that people vote in person in all possible circumstances with a voter ID after having their citizenship verified. I mean, that's the kind of the standard. And we're way far away from that right now. And as a result, confidence in the elections will continue to be strained.
I was afraid that would be the outlook that you would offer, Tom. I happen to share it. We have to have a Republican Party that does something. It's not doing anything under Ronna McDaniel. It's not doing, obviously, anything under the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill. And we have to have communities, local governments, and state governments who are, I mean, absolutely energized and committed to taking control of their elections. Because right now, Joe Biden has made it very clear with these two bills that are before the Congress that he means to federalize, to nationalize elections in this country and destroy our way of life. And it's that simple. And for him to campaign in Georgia, man, on this, and to lay out clearly, you're a racist if you don't agree with him, and accept nothing less than the will of the man who would be dictator, not president of the United States. It is the strongest authoritarian impulse either party has ever exhibited, but even the Democratic Party and its left-wing ideology has never approached the level of authoritarianism in its initiatives and in its conduct than the radical Dem Party right now. Absolutely Marxist impulses and authoritarian initiatives. Your thoughts as we wrap up here?
Well, I think we're in a revolutionary moment from the from the radical left, the extremist left, and we have a cynically, the most charitable interpretation is that the White House is controlled by cynics, and what started under Obama with a pen and a phone, it's metastasized under Biden, because he, as I said, he's not really, in my view, controlling the government effectively because of his cognitive and other challenges. And we're facing, a government that says "catch me if you can" when it comes to breaking the law, and that's dangerous for our country, that's for sure. And thankfully, the law still allows us to catch them every once in a while, and Judicial Watch does it.
Right.
The states do it now and again. And for instance, we'll see in the Supreme Court this week whether the Supreme Court will do it with Biden's abusive and anti-constitutional, I don't even want to say unconstitutional, anti-constitutional
Absolutely.
vaccine mandates.
Yeah, he wants to get rid of the filibuster. The man wants to have a new unit on domestic terrorism. And by the way, think of the equivalency of the definition of a domestic terrorist, according to the Attorney General, equals a parent speaking before the school board. This group they basically want to weaponize the federal government against the American citizen, and they're doing it every day. And there was a time we had a countervailing influence. Our government, remember this expression, Tom? Our government, we used to talk about checks and balances, 3 separate but equal branches of government. My God, there are no checks and balances on the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education. You name it, they are running willfully according to the orders of the cabal that influences the Biden administration. And there is no countervailing influence. It should be the courts, but there is no. Let's be honest. These courts are filled with left-wing activists. And there's no countervailing force to counteract the excesses, the abuses of the Department of Justice and the FBI in particular. And that is frightening. It should be frightening, I think, to every citizen right now. Your thoughts as we conclude.
Well, I've always been of the opinion that when it comes to public policy and rule of law issues, the Justice Department is often the locus of evil. And it needs to be the focus of significant reform because they defend everything the other agencies do in court and, kind of ratify it. And that needs to be a target of reform. And I think they need to be uprooted. I don't know if they're redeemable in their court, the way they're currently run and organized. That's for sure. Both the Justice Department and the FBI.
Tom, it's been great talking with you as always here today. Thank you for being with us and spending some time with us here on the Great America Show. You're a great American, a great friend, and thank you so much. I look forward to our next conversation here on the Great America Show. Thank you all for being with us, and God bless you. See you next time.